Over the past 75 years, more than 10,000 chemicals have entered our food supply, but the EU allows just 300 additives. At Thrive Market, we prioritize quality, banning over 1,000 ingredients found in conventional grocery stores. Our Healthy Swap scanner helps you find better versions of your pantry essentials without the junk, dyes, or fillers, and everything is delivered right to your doorstep. So shop at a grocery store that actually cares about your health at thrivemarket.com/get-started for 30% off your first order and a free $60 gift.
If you're a facilities manager at a university, you know students rely on the cafeteria for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and the occasional late-night snack. So when a dishwasher breaks down and dirty plates pile up, the mess hall can turn messy in the blink of an eye. Enter Grainger. With over 1 million industrial-grade products and fast delivery, the product you need now is never far away. So you can turn that dishwasher back into a lean, clean washing machine. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting just by emailing me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. If you like our show, be sure and check out our Patreon. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Opperman Report, on TikTok as at Ed Opperman, and you can find our show Friday night at Spreaker.com. I do a live show every Friday night. If you go to Spreaker.com and you sign up for free, you get an email notification whenever I put up new content, and that's where we keep all the archives. Now, I'm really excited about today's guest, Keith Harmon-Snow. You can find him at keithharmonsnow.com. He's written a book called The Worst Interest of the Child, The Trafficking of Children and Parents Through U.S. Family Courts. He also has an Indiegogo. He's trying to raise more funds to do a second book on this topic here. Expose Family Court Trafficking Parents and Children on Indiegogo. Mr. Keith Harmon-Snow, are you there?
Hi, Ed. Thanks for having me on. People can also find me on Instagram, just for their information.
That's right. I think I did find you on Instagram, too. Keith Harmon-Snow on Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
Tell the audience about yourself. Who is Keith Harmon-Snow?
I'll try to keep it short. I worked as in the 1980s, I got a master's degree and bachelor's degree in electrical engineering and worked for classified programs in the Reagan Star Wars defense programs, missile defense and radars and that sort of thing. And in 1989, I quit that, abandoned it, and flew to Asia and started traveling around and became a journalist eventually, very soon after that, and human rights investigator and eventually a genocide investigator. And I worked, for example, from 1999 to 2011 very heavily in Central Africa, but also in Afghanistan and Mongolia, looking at human rights issues. And, for example, in the 2004, 5, 6, 7 era, I also took a job very briefly for the United Nations as a genocide investigator in Sudan. So I'm an expert, so to speak, on the politics of genocide. And for that, I was awarded the 2009 Regents Lectureship at University of California, Santa Barbara. And, for example, the first Regents lecturer was Aldous Huxley, and there were a lot of very interesting people over the years. And then finally, in 2013, 11, somewhere around there, I started to learn about this case in a Connecticut courts where a mother's child was being trafficked. And as I heard about it through a friend, I denied that it could possibly be true. And finally, I just got so fed up with all what I thought were the lies that I looked into it myself, and it turned out it was true. And it was so horrifying that I ended up focusing my human rights attention and investigative skills on that story. And in the end, it became the book, The Worst Interests of the Child, which really is focused on Connecticut family courts, but it also looks nationally at a few other cases. And so in the end, I put together 10 or 15 Connecticut cases that had some of the same players, judges and guardian ad litem, they're called, and lawyers and visitation supervisors, and it looked like organized crime, and so I published the book.
Yeah, we've done a lot of shows about family court and CPS and the abuses, the corruption and stuff like that. But in your research here, you've discovered outright sex trafficking of children. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's many variations on the term pedophilia and also the term sex trafficking. And, for example, one very prominent case that I've looked into is in Oklahoma, two girls under 10 being trafficked basically by the court into a sex ring, which includes their father. And the court has avoided or ignored all relevant evidence that suggests that the mother is a good mother who's trying to keep the children safe, and the father is, criminal, a psychopath for the most part. And instead of doing the right thing in the best interest of the child, which is what the whole arena revolves around, this concept of the best interest of the child. And instead of doing that, they've given the children back to the father and denied the mother access for the most part, meaning she doesn't have very much time with their children at all. And they're being harmed, and now they're being trafficked by the father into, in other words, other men are coming into the picture and raping the children, these two young girls. That's sex trafficking. But there are other examples of sex trafficking, that much broader, much more serious, that's pretty serious. So much broader, much more profit-based, for example, or in some cases just where one or two children are being trafficked by the court. And when I say that, it means that the court knows what the right thing to do is, and they're doing the wrong thing intentionally. And they're covering it all up, and usually there's a lot of assets involved. They steal all the assets of the family. Mostly it's mothers. It's usually mothers who are persecuted by the courts, but not always. There are plenty of good fathers who are also persecuted by the courts. And it happens differently for different people. So people who live on the lower end of the poverty spectrum versus the people who live on the higher end of the poverty spectrum will be treated differently by the courts. However, if there's money to be gotten, the courts will get the money.
I totally agree with you. That's been my experience as well. You'll have two attorneys, they know each other outside of court, and they'll size up a couple and say, look how much money they got, let's just bleed them dry. And the judges are in on it. They order custody evaluations, all kind of tens of thousands of dollars. They're all getting kickbacks on this stuff. And it is probably the most corrupt place in the world is family court, where people have the low moral character to traffic in children and lives, probably as low as you can get. Why don't we take the first case that you came across and examine that case? Tell us what took place and the one that sparked your interest.
Sure, that's the case of Max Liberty. It was his name, a child who was under 10 at the time. This was about 2011, 2012, 2013, somewhere around there. And the mother discovered that the father was raping the child, and she tried to bring attention to that. It was in the middle of there was a divorce in process, or soon after that, or just before that. I don't remember the details about that. But the father, in this case, the husband, had already been, showing his teeth in terms of severe domestic violence, and then he turned it on to the child. And the court, when the mother reported it, things got worse. And every time that the mother took steps that seemed, in a logical, sane world that seemed logical and sane, the court made it worse, and they started to deny her rights. They started to fabricate evidence against her. They started to doctor reports. They would make sure that the child was funneled or channeled or routed through or to certain professionals who were acting as gatekeepers. And that's where I found the repetition in different cases. Same individuals, same players in some cases, and it includes lawyers. It includes the judge or judges. It includes lawyers. It includes visitation supervisors, as you said. It also includes guardian ad litem. Anytime there's a guardian ad litem in the case, and for people who don't know what a guardian ad litem is, it's a supposedly third-party individual that's appointed by the court with some expertise to make sure that the child the best interests of the child are served. So you've got the mother in many cases and the father, in most cases mother and father, and the guardian ad litem is appointed by the court, not as usually it's an attorney, somebody who's been in the law profession, and it's appointed by the court to act as supposedly an intermediary between the two parents. But what the guardian ad litems universally do is they bill incredible amounts of money, they lie through their teeth, they make sure that documents are fabricated, complaints to Child Protective Services, which, in different states are under different names, Department of Children and Families, DCF, or Child Protection Services, CPS, or whatever they are. The guardian ad litem, along with these other professionals who are part of the game, will make sure that the usually the good parent doesn't get the child. They will increase the conflict between the parents and stretch things out and make sure that the attorneys in the cases are getting a lot of money, and it requires that the attorneys be involved. But the guardian ad litem themselves will bill an incredible amount of money. And in the case that I looked into with Max Liberty, the GAL became a judge later. They appointed her as a judge, even though there were all these cases where people were complaining, serious complaints about fraud and negligence and, deception and lying and trafficking. And her name was Maureen Murphy. She was appointed to the bench. And then there's the supervised visitation, the visitation supervisors who they bring in to, assign to one parent. Usually the parent who's the good parent is assigned a visitation supervisor company. In the case of the Connecticut case that I looked at, the primary case, which is the centerpiece of the book, The Worst Interest of the Child, the supervised visitation company was run by this guy named Sarno. And he had made so much money on these two parents in particular that I found that he had flown or whatever. He had bought a property in Florida, which was approximately the same amount of money as he had taken from the mother of this child in the book. And when I looked into it as an investigator, this is where I started to use the term mafia, organized crime. This is organized crime. And what do I mean by the mafia? It's not like, The Godfather. It's not like it has anything to do with Italians. It's organized crime. It's white-collar organized crime, which includes racketeering. It includes trafficking, which is a crime against humanity, a human rights violation. It includes all kinds of doctoring of evidence and documentation, and legal fraud by the court, fraud upon the court, by the judge, by some of the lawyers. Often there will be a good attorney assigned, the mother usually, sometimes the father will go through the process of making sure that the mother can't get a good attorney by going around and interviewing every single attorney that might be available to her. And once he's done that, even if he has no intentions of using them, the mother cannot use that attorney. So when the mother does get a good attorney, they're still charging these exorbitant fees, and in the end, they are unwilling. The attorney in 90% of the cases is unwilling to challenge the court. Unwilling, because the attorney has other cases with the court. The other attorney has other cases before the same judges and different judges, and the last thing the attorney wants is to be disbarred. And the system is rigged. There's absolutely no justice for these parents. Now, in a case that I just interviewed someone for in Atlanta, the mother in this case her children had been trafficked as well to an abusive sex abuser father, who's a very, very, very wealthy attorney, very, very powerful attorney. He has jumped around at the most powerful law firms, and now this mother, she calls them big law. So there's your average law firm, and then there's big law, these big, big law firms that are absolutely acting above the law. So and what she said was, very clear to her, and she laid it all out for me very clearly. And she said, there's no chance that anybody in Atlanta, in this particular county, is going to get justice in the courts. And she wasn't just talking about family courts now. She's talking about a level of criminality, racketeering, corruption that has pervasive, it's appearing across the board in different courts, not just the family court. And that's what we're talking about. If people didn't see it, they should see the film I Care a Lot.
Oh yeah.
The film I Care a Lot is similar, but it's about forcing older people into, not even old, but they don't have to be old, but usually it's older people into some sort of a home where the people involved, the attorneys or the owners of the institutions, nursing homes or whatever you want to call them, make a huge profit by having these people incarcerated there. And I Care a Lot makes a very good. People should see that. That's very similar. However, I Care a Lot. I take a little bit of disagreement with I Care a Lot, because in I Care a Lot they make it sound like they use as an example the person that is mistreated turns out to be actually, in this case, somebody who's also involved in criminal activity, where that's absolutely not necessary. They didn't have to do that to make a good film, an accurate film, or a good documentary about the problem. But in that case, they do. The person that gets persecuted, whose family member gets taken into this home, happens to be connected to herself organized crime. And so that twists the story in a way that doesn't really exist.
Well,
I mean, it might happen that way, but it's not really true.
Yeah, Keith Harmon-Snow, have you seen the film? It's a documentary, The Guardians.
No, I haven't.
Oh, I'm going to send it to you, man. I had the filmmaker on, and it's exactly what you're talking about, but it's a documentary about the Guardian system, and mostly in Las Vegas it talks about, and Nevada, how they're private guardians, they're paid, it's a private company, and they seize all these people's assets and stuff. It's a plague going on over there in Nevada. But it's
a plague all over the country.
Yeah, all over the country. I was going to say the same thing. Maybe I met you through Janet Phelan, perhaps?
Janet Phelan, yes. She wrote a review of my book.
Right, because you're right. 'Cause she talks about this topic as well, about the guardianship. They're working on that case right now with Mr. Hanty over there in Nevada, too.
Uh-huh.
Let me ask you...
I've come across cases and looked at cases in Tucson and Phoenix, and in Oklahoma, in Missouri, in Florida, in North Carolina, in Massachusetts, in New York, especially Westchester County, and Connecticut, also Westchester County. So, but there's also plenty of cases. I get an email usually about once a week from one of these mothers who's being run through the system, her life being destroyed, and there have been cases, obviously from Texas, and there's cases from Ohio, there's cases from South Dakota, there's cases from Washington State, and a lot of cases in California.
Well, let me ask you a question. So right now, is the focus of your life's work right now this situation here in family court, or are you still doing the stuff, the international war correspondent type stuff? It seems like a very elaborate work you've been doing overseas.
I have two main thrusts at the moment. One, I'm trying to finish the book that I've been writing about the Rwanda genocide, because what happened in Rwanda in 1994, we were told one story, and then we were given, we meaning the English news reading public, we're told one story about all these the story is this: Hutus killed Tutsis. 600,000 to 1.5 million Tutsis were slaughtered in 100 days, and Clinton stood around. We knew about it, but we didn't do anything. That's the propaganda. That's the establishment line. And, academics have made their careers on that. And it's entrenched. And it's in the Atlantic Monthly, and it's in, Samantha Power from Harvard University wrote the book, A Problem from Hell. Well,
they made that movie with Don Cheadle, yeah.
They made Hotel Rwanda with Don Cheadle playing the part of the real-life hero Paul Rusesabagina, who is currently in prison in Rwanda, who was framed and he was kidnapped and taken to Rwanda by the regime in power there. And, people don't understand that what happened in Rwanda in 1994 began in 1980 in Uganda, when a guy named Roger Winter from something called the U.S. Committee for Refugees started supporting these so-called rebels who fomented war in Uganda, civil war, so to speak, but it was low-intensity warfare. This is what, if people remember Oliver North and how he was brought before some sort of an inquiry about his dirty dealings in Nicaragua, El Salvador, and the human rights atrocities that went on in Guatemala, El Salvador, Nicaragua, and the Contra arms scandals. This is exactly what they did in Central Africa as well, but it's been very, very, very heavily covered up. So this guy, Roger Winter, supported helping these rebels. The United States, Britain, and Israel brought them to power in Uganda. That was Yoweri Museveni, the current president of Uganda. And then in 1990, supported the invasion of Rwanda. That was Paul Kagame, the current president, dictator in Rwanda. And in April 6, 1994, the first day of the so-called 100 Days of Genocide that you hear about in Hotel Rwanda or any of these other films, when the two presidents of Burundi and Rwanda were killed in an aerial assassination. Missiles were shot from the ground on the approach of the plane to Kigali, Rwanda, carrying the two presidents. This was a CIA operation. Paul Kagame is our man, and it was a coup d'etat. We took out the president of Rwanda and the president of Burundi. They didn't care about Burundi so much. It was Rwanda. And that became the U.S. military base of operations with Uganda for all of these clandestine and open warfare. And then, of course, what happened soon after the genocide in Rwanda, which, again, was a U.S. coup d'etat, what happened was the invasion of Zaire and the overthrow of our longtime dictator, Mobutu Sese Seko. And the Clinton administration was the administration in power, and the Zaire, Mobutu was supported more by Republicans at that point, and the Democrats marched across Central Africa with the presidents of Uganda and Rwanda sending in their troops. They called it an African conflict, and 10 million people have died since, and the war in eastern Congo is still going on. It's being prosecuted by the United States military and British and the Israeli Secret Service behind Paul Kagame and Yoweri Museveni. And yes, there were troops, U.S. troops on the ground in Central Africa, in Rwanda, and in Zaire, and in southern Sudan, which is why Sudan was split into South Sudan and North Sudan, and South Sudan became its own country. Roger Winter was also involved there. So anyway, that's another book that I'm working on, because most of that information, people's minds are just completely scrambled. They've seen Hotel Rwanda.
Right.
And they've read Philip Gurvich's New Yorker articles, and they've read Philip Gurvich's book, We Wish to Inform You That Tomorrow Our Families Will Be Killed. Or they've gone to guerrilla tourism in Rwanda to see the guerrillas, Gorilla, not Guer. And they went to one of the genocide memorials and saw these skulls, and that was the end of it. Throw in a little alcohol that Americans drink so much of, and some pot these days, vaping, and propaganda really works very well. So people aren't able to see the reality of what really went down and is still going down in Central Africa. So that's the book that I'm working on as well.
Yeah, once you see a movie that really tugs at your heart, it's hard to ever forget that or ever get unbrainwashed. So half of your life is devoted to human rights and genocide investigations, right? And then the other half to this. How were you funding this overseas? Because it seems like a huge operation you were running here.
Oh, I'm a one-person. I do tree work if I need to. I mean, I earn money by any means necessary, which is why I found myself stuck at the Dallas airport not so long ago with not enough money in my account to rent the car that I was trying to rent.
Okay. So for a second version of this book, a part 2 of this book, there's an Indiegogo called Exposed Family Court Trafficking, Parents and Children. Is there a fundraiser for your work overseas?
No, not at present.
Not at present. Well, then people should double down on this one here. Exposed Family Court Trafficking. Yeah, wouldn't it? And my audience is very good at that too. I got to really hand it to them. Now, what about
if people could understand? I mean, I'm very articulate. I don't say and beat around the bush. I name names. If people could understand that, if they could read a book about this, if they could get me to speak, if they could hear me speak and show pictures that I've taken in Central Africa, it just all unfolds very clearly And the more you read in the New York Times, the less you will understand. That's why I'm known for this quote: if you're reading the New York Times, you're contributing to your own mental illness. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't have to be the New York Times. The system is, as Noam Chomsky would say, not monolithic. The New York Times, the LA Times, the Newsweek, U.S. News and World Report. There's that guy, Joshua Hammer, that worked for Newsweek, right, back in 1994 in Rwanda, who also has written all kinds of propaganda about Israel and the Iraq War. And he ran a big New York Times Magazine article in March of 2021 where it talks about Paul Rusesabagina and how he was a hero of Hotel Rwanda, but now he's in prison in Rwanda and deserves to be. But he might as well be an agent for the Central Intelligence Agency who's trying to keep this guy, and the NSA, which is 4 times bigger or 5 times bigger than the CIA, trying to keep this guy Paul Kagame, the world's leading butcher, in power. Because everything that went down in Rwanda and Uganda and South Sudan and Congo, we're talking about over 10 million lives. And that's an understatement. That's a huge understatement. And just slaughtering people left and right, the most horrible atrocities. And, where are the human rights experts? Well, Human Rights Watch where's Human Rights Watch when we're talking about family courts? Why aren't they taking on the cases of these mothers? Because they've been sold the propaganda that says that these are, high conflict cases between parents, and we don't want to meddle in that. I don't want to stick my nose in that. That's some woman's angry at her husband. Please. The truth is, this is a giant human rights scandal in the United States of America right now. This mothers and family courts, especially mothers. It's most often mothers because fathers' rights organizations are organized. Fathers' rights movement is a movement. There is no similar thing for mothers. They've, the abuse. It's so difficult for a good mother who's trying to save her child's life. It's so difficult for them to go through the abuse that they go through with all the residual PTSD and the other forms of, domestic violence that they've suffered. It's so difficult for them to organize, and nobody believes them. Every mother thinks, well, that can't happen to me. She's obviously something wrong with that mother, and nobody thinks it can happen to them until it does, and then nothing adds up. And even as it doesn't add up, they continue to throw money at their lawyer. Yeah. And their lawyer starts giving them, these answers, do this, do that. But the ultimate truth is most lawyers serve the system and they're not willing to challenge it. And they're just so corrupt, they're not able, or unethical, they're not able to say to themselves or to the mother, I can't really help you. That's the bottom line.
We're talking to Keith Harmon-Snow. You can find him at keithharmonsnow.com. He's also on Instagram. He's got an Indiegogo. He's trying to raise funds to write a second book, a follow-up book to expose family court trafficking, parents, and children.
I lost you there. I'm not hearing you.
Well, that's okay. I can hear you. Can you hear me now?
Sure.
Have you, like a crossover, right? Have you discovered like a human trafficking by UN troops? You hear these stories about UN troops being involved in sex trafficking over there as well.
The only reason we hear those stories is because it provides the media an avenue to make it look like they're independent, make it look like they're investigative, make it look like they're actually serving the function that they're supposed to serve, which is to be, some sort of, quote, democratic, unquote, arm of the people. And nothing could be further from the truth. So the United Nations is really just mercenaries serving the interests of powerful countries. And so the UN in Rwanda in 1990, they actually came in December of 1993, UNAMIR, and that's where, there's the film Shake Hands with the Devil about General Romeo Dallaire, the Canadian general who was in charge of UNAMIR, the United Nations Assistance Mission in Rwanda. And UNAMIR just served the RPF, the Rwandan Patriotic Front, Paul Kagame, and the people backed by the United States. So the UN didn't, and of course they didn't stop any genocide in Central Africa at the time, and they didn't stop any genocide in the Congo or Zaire later. And I flew around on Air Monuc, which was the United Nations Observers Mission in Congo airline charter system where once you're an accredited journalist within the country working with the United Nations reporting, they will fly you around generally where you want to go. And I worked, often flew Air MONUC, we called it. But MONUC in the Congo was the same, and their follow-on after the MONUC mission was terminated, it became MONUSCO, which is just some other ridiculous acronym for the United Nations in the Congo. But the point is that they just are mercenaries who serve the interests of the powerful. So what are we talking about in Central Africa? We're talking about George Bush he was a director. George Bush Sr. was on the board of directors of Barrick Gold Corporation, who was involved in the overthrow of Mobutu, seizing the profits to be made there at the time. And the Clintons were connected to American Mineral Fields International. And the Clintons, of course, had a very shady, very dark, nasty history of corruption in Arkansas long before Bill Clinton rose to the position of president of the United States. But the mining companies in Central Africa, for example, we're just talking about a piece of the pie. So gold, silver, diamonds. Maurice Templesman, the former lover of Jackie Kennedy Onassis, Leon Templesman and Sons, diamonds interest in Central Africa, connected to the CIA agent Lawrence Devlin. You can read his book. I mean, it's openly said right there. And that was the connection through Mobutu to make sure that they got the most, the biggest, best diamonds, all the diamonds. They had a cartel that got the diamonds out of Central Africa. Any of these films like Blood Diamond with Leonardo DiCaprio, it's just, white people's nonsense. And at the beginning of the film, they talk about there's a bunch of white suits in The Hague or somewhere like that talking about how these horrible blood diamonds are, as if these people don't know what's going on. And then at the end of the film, they make it clear that they've passed something called the Kimberley process, which certifies all diamonds as clean. Listen, brother, if you're buying your wife a diamond, I don't care where you're buying it, it's a blood diamond. Because the blood diamond industry is rampant, and the Kimberley process was just a smokescreen to make it look like the whole thing had been cleaned up. And I can give you film after film after film. Beasts of No Nation, for example, the first Netflix film that was made, the first film that was made by Netflix, Beasts of No Nation, if you didn't see it, and don't watch it. It's horrible propaganda. But it covers up for the diamonds trade, and Hotel Rwanda, and on and on. Tarzan. I mean, there's always some white guy. I mean, look at Avatar. Who's the hero in Avatar? Is it Quaritch, the really nasty military guy? Well, for military people, Quaritch was the hero, even though he died. But the guy Jake, who was in a wheelchair in the beginning and ends up becoming the leader of the of the tribe, and marries Natiri and all that. I mean, not only is it a white guy, but it's a white guy who's not even able-bodied who becomes the savior, the hero, and the supreme god who comes in on their special bird to save the day. I mean, this stuff goes on and on and on, and people, it's great entertainment.
But it's part of the brainwashing. It's part of the manipulation.
Absolutely,
of the brain.
And then people say, "Oh yeah, but Mr. Snow, what about Black Panther?" Well, what about Black Panther? Who's the biggest hero and who's the most protected in the first Black Panther movie? The CIA agent, the little skinny white CIA agent, and he comes back in the second movie. So it's just nasty propaganda, and it's always being it's what are called warlike racial operations.
Let me ask you a question.
Targets.
Now, when you're over there overseas and you're covering these subjects, are you ever in danger? Like, it would be pretty easy to get rid of you.
Sure, it's pretty dangerous to go into Afghanistan if the U.S. military finds out that I'm there investigating the U.S. military. It's pretty easy to off me and make it look like have my head cut off and make it look like it was a bunch of towel heads on camels. Fortunately, that hasn't happened to me yet.
Yeah.
But I definitely am very careful. When I went to Afghanistan, I was very careful about where I went and who I talked to. But
and just to be clear,
I mean, this is not a joke. I'm persona non grata in 4 countries in Central Africa, and that means that if Paul Kagame could get his hands on me, he would make sure I disappeared or was killed or whatever, tortured. And that's not a joke at all. My name appeared on a hit list, and I wrote a story about it immediately called the Rwanda hit list. And it appeared on that hit list about 2006. And I was one of many people on the list, but they were the people that were listed as doing damage to the country in terms of telling the truth is what we were doing. We were telling the truth, but from the point of view of the dictatorship in Central Africa, we were doing damage to the country. Where what Paul Kagame has done is he's paid an incredible amount of money on the blood diamonds and the blood minerals out of the Congo, which he's pillaged. They've paid an incredible amount of money to law firms and propaganda firms, PR firms, to smokescreen and cover it all up, such as the firm out of Atlanta, Good Works International. And you know who founded that? Who's that black guy who was on the balcony when Martin Luther King was killed? What was his name?
Jesse Jackson?
It's a real famous story about how he was on the balcony when Martin Luther King was killed, and it makes it sound like he's another civil rights hero. Well, he's the guy who founded Good Works International. I'm forgetting his name at the moment. But,
not Jesse Jackson.
He's very close to Paul Kagame. And Good Works International is just one of these PR firms that they're paying millions and millions and millions of dollars to smokescreen the whole Central Africa thing. And Hollywood, of course, plays a role in this. It's not accidental that they come out with a film like Tarzan or Blood Diamond or whatever, you know.
Yeah, and to say that you're on an enemy's list, it's not far-fetched because we
let
saw.
Let me keep talking. So.
Oh, you can't hear me?
I don't know what to say here. Let's see. There you are. Hi.
You hear me now? Okay, good. It's not far-fetched to say that a foreign dictator would snatch up an American and bring him back, because General Flynn was offered that job to go after a Turkish dissident. For our audience, okay, there's a portion of this audience who thinks that the UN is somehow a danger to the United States, that they can somehow oppress the United States with Agenda 21 and UN troops occupying U.S. soil. Do you see a scenario where the UN is not, like you said, on the side of these imperialists and on the side of these genocides?
Well, I don't support the United Nations. When they contacted me and asked me to provide testimony at the International Criminal Court, for example, I don't support the International Criminal Court. I didn't support and won't support the International Criminal Tribunal on Rwanda or Yugoslavia or any of them, because they're just victor's justice, just like Nuremberg tried only the Nazis. It didn't try any of the American war criminals, and we committed horrible crimes. We committed horrible crimes in Korea, horrible crimes that people have no idea what the United States did in Korea. And so I wrote a big story about that. But the point is, the United Nations is seen and presented as, that originally I think it could have had, if there was some hope for it, before 1960. But that's the time when, those certain players in the intelligence establishment really subverted the future for the rest of the world. And that would be the Dulles brothers, John Foster and Allen, the head of the CIA, and John Foster was the State Department. And the formation of the CIA out of the OSS, for example, and the birth of the cult of the atom, the nuclear arena, and all of that nastiness that went down with that, which is, there's another area. And people have to be careful not to be caught up in the conspiracies like the earth is flat. Mm. If you don't believe the earth, some people are sure the earth is flat, and that I'm deluded when I think the earth is round. Well, the earth is not flat. But anyway, the point is that the whole conspiracy thing, they've made all these movies about conspiracies. There are very real conspiracies. And RICO, if people don't know what RICO is, the Racketeer Influence Corrupt Organizations Act was passed by the U.S. Congress. It's supposed to be able to be used by courts, law firms, legal institutions to bring down severe corruption, racketeering, and extortion. And RICO is just another tool of the establishment, which they use selectively to bring down certain individuals, but not others. And back to the UN, for example, the UN is just another giant corrupt institution. Now, it doesn't mean there aren't some good people working for the UN. There's also some good people working for Doctors Without Borders or Médecins Sans Frontières, whichever one you want. But generally, the biggest business in the world the biggest single, if we focus on it as an industry, is the charity industry. So you've got the gold, and let's say Congo, you've got gold, diamonds, molybdenum, you've got cobalt and copper and coltan. People see all these stories about coltan in our cell phones, but the big mining industry in Congo is cobalt. Without cobalt, you can't have super alloys. And the cobalt connection was what Mobutu was all about. He made sure that we started getting our cobalt out of the Congo as early as the 1960s. And cobalt is essential for superalloys for nuclear anything, nuclear weapons, nuclear missiles, nuclear anything, for ship hulls, for tank armor, for blast furnaces, for undersea and outer space unmanned aerial vehicles. They all require cobalt, but you never see a story about the truth about the cobalt industry. It's even twisted it around and they twisted the propaganda around and made it look like the cobalt coming out of the problem coming out of the Congo is cobalt for cell phones, which is just absolute nonsense. Cobalt is necessary for military weapons, for nuclear weapons. You have to have cobalt-based superalloys. Anyway, if you add up all the value of the cobalt and the oil and the natural gas, molybdenum gas, diamonds, all of these other mining extraction industries, you don't even come close to the biggest business in the world, in Congo, for example, let's stick into Congo, and that is the charity industry. Médecins Sans Frontières and CARE and Save the Children, these are just nasty, it's managed inequality. It's just another form of big business.
Are they?
And the United Nations is no different.
These charities you describe, a lot of times, are they a front for the CIA?
There's plenty of them that are. But there's plenty of them that aren't. And the ones that aren't fronts for the CIA have CIA people all the way through them, So it's just like the New York Times. There's got to be so many CIA agents people on the CIA payroll working for the New York Times. There's got to be. If you really look at it. And this is not conspiracy. I brought up conspiracy before, and I wanted to point out, a conspiracy is really two or more people who get to, and that's why I brought up RICO, and I forgot that. RICO has to apply to more than one person. It has to be at least two people who are, racketeering or influence corruption, et cetera. And the same thing with a conspiracy. A conspiracy is when any group of people get together and, make some decision that is against the law. How about that simplified definition? Well, every board of directors meeting for a giant multinational corporation is a conspiracy against the rest of us because they're making decisions that destroy the planet, destroy people's lives. And this family court stuff, it's the destruction, the absolute destruction of lives going on at this very moment. And it could be changed if people woke up to it.
Well, but you know what the amazing thing about this family court thing is? Because everyone's been through it. We've all been through it. Either as a child, your parents got divorced, or you got divorced yourself. And we all see it's a total mess. It's a broken system. It's corrupt. But once you're out of it, you're just so relieved to be out of it. You don't even want to think about it again. So the corruption just continues on and on.
Sure.
Yeah.
Who can blame anybody who gets out of it for not wanting to have anything to do with it? It's so traumatizing.
You run for your life. You get out of there, you run for life. Yeah, I'd say we think alike, too, because the whole RICO thing, whenever anybody criticizes a conspiracy, I say, hey, listen, I worked on the defense for those RICO cases back in the 80s in New York City when it first came out. So if there's no conspiracies, let all my clients go, okay? They're doing 40, 50 years. Let them out if there's no conspiracies, because obviously there are. Now, in your experience in investigating family courts, have you discovered that the parents of an abused child, sexually abused child, are discouraged from making that allegation by their attorney?
No. Well, depends on what you mean. Parents, no, because usually one of them is one of them is going to make the allegation because one of them is doing the perpetration. So let's say the father is the perpetrator, which is 90% of the cases. I mean, very rarely is it a female perpetrator, but it's not unheard of. So the father is the perpetrator. The mother makes he files a claim. Losing the language that you used, and I've lost your.
Well, let me explain to you. Let me explain. You're right, no problem. It's been my experience where a mother is alleging sexual abuse from the father. the attorney will discourage her from making that allegation because it's going to discredit her credibility. It's going to open a whole can of worms. And just like what happens, right?
Yes. Yes, and if some of the attorneys who are if they're new and they're naive, they'll think, oh, well, make the allegation and everything will clear up. But then it doesn't, and the attorney doesn't understand what happened because the attorney's too new to realize that they're part of a corrupt system, and they just can't fathom that they've paid $160,000 or $200,000, $300,000 for a Harvard law degree that suddenly is a bunch of good old boys and some good old girls making sure that it just doesn't work. It's profits. I think if people could look into the way that we have to figure out, and that's the problem here. Because there's so little transparency because the courts say, well, this is private. You don't want to. We don't want to disturb the privacy of these parents. So we have to, keep this private. They don't let the media in, even though the media does not report on it. And why doesn't the media report on it? Because the directors of the media are part of the child trafficking. They're part of the sex organizations that are raping these children. This is. If people find this hard to hear, I am not hysterical. This is the absolute truth. Why do you think that stuff is covered up the way it's covered up? No, Keith
Harmon-Snow, trust me, my audience understands this.
So yes, they're discouraged. They're discouraged from making the disclosure that the child is being sexually trafficked by many lawyers who know that it's not going to work, and the lawyers keep getting paid. Like in one case, I'm looking at, the lawyers just keep telling the mother, "Well, you just got to get your children to speak up more." These are children that are being raped under 10. They're under 10 years old. Who are they going to speak up to? They don't know what's going on. They don't understand. They don't understand why they're being brought into a room with a bunch of men who are then raping them. Where's the ethics in this?
Well,
that's the problem with our society across the board. There's a general lack of ethics and spiritual understanding or spiritual realities. People can go to church, but it doesn't mean that they're going to be spiritually awake.
Family court is probably
a very immature society.
I find it's more ethical and unethical than criminal court because here you have people willing to disrupt children's lives, rip them from the parent that raised them over money, and they know they're doing this. This is common knowledge. And another reason.
It is more unethical. I agree.
And another reason, I get along with criminals better than I do family court lawyers, I'll tell you that, or family court judges. Who are some of the craziest people that I've ever met in my life. But what do you call it? Another reason why the media doesn't report on this is because it would be all we're reporting. Everyone's experiencing this. Everyone has gone through family court, has the same exact complaints. Everyone knows it's a mess, but it makes so much damn money. These lawyers are loaded. These custody evaluators are loaded. They're getting 10 jobs a day for $10,000.
Yep.
Do you have a solution, Snow?
As a tree worker, I saw how that worked when I realized that, gee, if I could do this or this, I'll just make so much more money. But just, you got to ask where you're going to be at the end of the day. But these people who think it's all about money instead of who think the life is all about money. Yeah. I hesitate to use the term they're going to go to Hades, but because that's based in a Christian philosophy, but a spiritual philosophy of Christianity, because I don't necessarily adopt all of that, but people are certainly wherever they're going, it's not going to be. Why take a risk? Yeah. Why would you do that? Why would you do that to yourself? Because really the violence these judges are doing, they're doing violence to themselves. And they're just one of the people that are getting hurt in these horrible, horrible things. But that's the nature of absolute power, isn't it?
Absolutely. Keith Harmon-Snow, when you've immersed yourself into this family court situation, can you come up with a solution?
Run for your life.
Yeah, so true.
And the problem is, once people have to. I don't like to say read my book, but if you read my book, you realize that if people would read my book before they get involved in the system, they'll realize that throwing money at a lawyer is not going to work. Yeah. Changing lawyers is not going to work. It's just not going to work. That's why the film was made No Way Out But One by this woman, this mother, who realized there was only one way out, and that was to leave. And she had her passports. She managed to get out of the country with her children. She managed to get asylum in another country, and in many cases, or most cases, that's impossible. The mother doesn't have the passports. They can't get the passports because they've already gotten into the system, and the system is going to make sure that she can't run with the children. And what's this woman's name in Missouri that's all over the family court thing right now, who ran with her children and was found at a domestic violence shelter, and they stripped her of her children and threw her in jail. Can't think of her name, but so running is a pretty limited option. And what's the other alternative? If people can reconcile with their ex, reconcile. It may be ugly, but it can't be as ugly as family court. Nothing can be as ugly as family court.
Yeah, that is so true. And your standard of living reduced after divorce, after custody. It's not, if you can put up with it, do it, you know. Keith,
I know that mothers might hear that and think, there's absolutely no way I can reconcile with him. Yeah. And then probably in some cases you just can't, because we're talking about psychopaths and narcissists. Most of these guys are narcissists. And there's plenty of crazy women involved in the situation too. But if you can reconcile, even if you know, putting up with a narcissist in some cases is going to be a lot easier for your children than going through the family courts. And if you got a GAL, you got to get the GAL out of the picture. Supervised visitation, no. People have to realize they just. That's why if you can read my book, read it, because it lays it out, and then you will realize that it's not a fun book to read. I don't advise it to anybody, but if you read it, you realize that it's going to happen to you. You can see the signs. It's going to happen to you the same way, differently, but the same. And you can look out for what's going on. Also, people can demand a jury trial. If they can demand a jury trial, their chances are better in front of a jury than in front of one of these corrupt judges. However, that itself has its own problems. Most judges and most lawyers will say, tell their clients, you can't, the lawyer for the defendant will say, for the mother, you can't get a jury trial. That's not true. You have a right to a jury trial in the United States of America. But you have to demand it. You have to fight for it. They're going to resist it because you're basically, stealing the money that they're trying to steal from you. You're stealing it back. You're getting it back, keeping it from them. So,
Keith Harmon-Snow, we're out of time. The book, once again, is called The Worst Interests of the Child, The Trafficking of Children and Parents Through U.S. Family Courts, KeithHarmonsnow.com. There's a fundraiser to work on a second book on Indiegogo, Expose Family Court Trafficking, Parents and Children. But buy the book. That's a great way to support the work here. Mr. Snow, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. Again, you can find him on Instagram, too, at Keith Harmon-Snow.
Thanks for having me on, Ed, and send me a link when you're done.
You got it, brother. Thank you very much.
Have a great day.
You too.
Bye-bye.